Hello, and welcome to another Green Team of the Legendarium episode. In today's episode, we will be discussing the very popular new adult fantasy debut by Rebecca Yarros, Fourth Wing. Joining me in this discussion are Mirlya.
Hello.
And Seth, aka Smutbat, apparently.
Hello.
Before we dive into our chat, which I know we're eager to do, real quick, Mirlya has read the Fourth Wing previously, and so you've reread it. Is this
Yes,
your first reread or?
Yes, first reread.
First reread? Okay. And then this is Seth and my first time reading it. I'm excited. I think we're all excited to discuss. But before we get there, let's talk a little bit about the author and the premise of the book. Then we'll get into spoiler-free thoughts, and then we'll dive into all the glorious spoilers at the end. So Rebecca Yarros, in case you don't know who she is a #1 New York Times bestselling author with over 20 published novels under her belt, which I did not know until I started looking up about her for this episode. From what I've gathered, she primarily writes romance, or at least romance is featured in most, if not all, of her novels. And on her website, it also says that she loves military heroes. Her family is also very into hockey, and she is so passionate about helping kids through the foster system that she and her husband founded a nonprofit to do just that, and it's called 1 October. The book that we're discussing today, as we said, is called Fourth Wing. You may have heard of it. And if you haven't, well, you live in a very different part of the internet. Fourth Wing is the first book in a planned 5-book series, which I learned today that the series is called Empyrean, which I've never heard anybody call it by that. It's always been Fourth Wing. But the second book, Iron Flame, was published October 31st, 2023. And the third book, Onyx Storm, has a release date of January 21st, 2025. All right, so what is the premise of Fourth Wing? I did my best, so here we go. The story is set in the land of Bezgaeth, where each citizen is assigned into a quadrant. Think faction, school, house, whatever. For example, there's a scribe quadrant where they maintain the archives, the written history and knowledge of the land and people. Then there's the writer quadrant where people volunteer to go through a grueling process in the hopes of bonding with a dragon and becoming a writer. It's basically a war college, as dragons are the most prized weapon for Bezgaeth. And our protagonist is a young woman named Violet, who is the youngest in a military family, who is planning on becoming a scribe, but unwillingly ends up in the writer quadrant, where she has to use her wits to survive. There's political intrigue galore, lots of physical challenges, rivalries, friendships. It's a roller coaster of a ride. Oh yeah, and some dude named Zayden and his cohort, the children of the rebellion cohort. There's quite a bit going on there as well. And then I was looking at some of the blurbs and also reviews of this book. Very interesting. We'll talk about the reviews later, but Glamour magazine had given it the blurb, "This book contains an addictive, drug-like essence that will make you relinquish all responsibility until the very last word. Do not say I didn't warn you." Would any of you agree, disagree with that blurb? What was your experience like?
Yeah, I don't know if it was addictive for me, but it definitely moves fast, and I would find myself reading large chunks, kind of longer than I would think, faster than I would think, like the whole time I was reading it. I feel like I almost read the book in like 3 or 4 sittings.
Nice.
So I could definitely see like how that might apply if you're really super into this, and the story does just fly by. She throws you right into the action, and it just kind of moves along.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's also not like a short book. It's like about 500 pages, at least the hardcover edition.
Yeah.
Mirlya, was it addictive for you the first time and second time?
It's definitely a fast read. I think that it did cause, maybe not myself particularly, but a lot of my friends who read it at the same time, a lot of book slumps where we just couldn't pick up another book because it was just nothing like this one. So I definitely think that it has an element of addictiveness to it where you just don't stop thinking about it afterwards.
Nice. Okay. Interesting about the book slumps after. This Fourth Wing was also the 2023 winner of the Goodreads Choice Award for Favorite Romantasy, which I think we're going to talk a little bit about. Is this a romantasy or not? And also, by the way, it's got over 2 million ratings on Goodreads, which is quite explosive. Okay, enough of my rambling, and let's get into our spoiler-free discussion. We'll start with general impression of the book. Liked it, didn't like it, what rating would you give it? Seth, you already said yes, it was fast-paced. You read it pretty quickly in a handful of sittings. Other than that, what would you give? Thumbs up, thumbs down? How many stars would you give it?
For me, I gave it a 3 out of 5 on Goodreads, and that might seem harsh, but I'm definitely probably not the target romantasy audience reader.
No, you
No.
renamed yourself Smutbat.
Well, yeah. This is because this is the horniest book I've ever read. We'll get into it, which probably says more about me than it does about the book.
Speaking of horniness, I'll just put a disclaimer here that when we get into the spoiler sections, probably, I mean, there are explicit scenes in this book, and if we're going to talk about them, we may talk about them in a bit more explicit manner. So, FYI, if that's not your thing, feel free to tune out.
Yeah. No, but I think, there's different types of art you like to consume at different times. And I have been reading some very heavy, very complex type stories lately, working my way through Malazan and, Book of the New Sun this year and a bunch of other stuff. And so this, I think, kind of came around at like a good time. This is a fun read to dig into. It doesn't have a ton of, POVs and stuff like that. We can get into it, but it's fast paced and easy to engage with. And that was great for me. I think that was probably one of the aspects I liked the most about it. It was just how fast it was and how much of a breeze it was to read. And like I said, the romance aspect, I actually thought maybe in the non-spoilery section was maybe my favorite part of this book.
You like the romance part the best? Is that what you said?
Well, that or / maybe the sex scenes themselves, actually, that might have been the best part of the book. So I could kind of see why, people get into this romantasy, smut.
Yeah.
If we even want to, again, I'm a newbie to this. People are probably going to be laughing at me all up and down the internet. But, yeah, no, it was a fun book. I just...
Nice.
Was it high art to me? Like, I don't know. But it doesn't need to be. Not every book needs to blow me away and make me, think about philosophy and life and all those kinds of things. So
I don't think you're alone. There was someone else on our Discord who definitely mentioned that they thought the sex scenes were the best part of the book as well. So I don't think you're alone in that thought process.
And I guess that makes sense because at least based on my gleaming of what the author has written previously, like that would be more what she's familiar with, what she's honed her craft on, and the fantasy elements seem to be newer, at least for her writing wise.
Yeah.
What about you, Mirlya? Did your reread hold up?
Yes. So I really, when I first read this book, I thoroughly enjoyed it. It filled a in the book world that was lacking. I probably fit a very specific demographic of readers who I started with Tamora Pierce, and through the years there was kind of another void of other books that kind of fit the same sort of writing style as Tamora Pierce, and then suddenly all of these young adult books like The Hunger Games and Divergent and The Maze Runner and all of these types of dystopian fiction books kind of came out, and that and Twilight, I guess, as well. And they sort of started off a whole nother generation of readers. Obviously, there was things like Harry Potter as well in that mix as well. But I feel like this book very much fits the same readership that those books seem to target. It does have a slightly different premise, but there's also very, very similar. There are very similar themes, and I think that it has that sort of a feel of a young adult book, but aged up characters and an aged up sort of audience. And I mean, I gave it 5 stars. I think the average Goodreads rating is 4.5 stars, which for a book that has 2 million.
Yeah, it's over 2 million.
Over 2 million ratings, 4.5 stars is pretty damn good overall.
Yeah.
It's pretty telling.
Most books that get to that point, you're always going to have people who absolutely hated the book and absolutely, trash it. But for a book to maintain a rating above 4 stars is pretty damn good when you get that many reviews and ratings.
I wanted to segue on that because Panda said earlier there's over 2 million Goodreads views. I did a little homework on this because 2 million's a lot. Famously in the fantasy circles, Brandon Sanderson's like insanely popular. Mistborn, The Final Empire, the first book in Mistborn, has 700,000 Goodreads reviews rating. The Way of Kings, the first entry in the massive Stormlight archive, has a little under 600,000 Goodreads reviews. So this book was huge. I mean, like a huge, like she must have tapped in and pulled in kind of united a lot of different fan bases in like a perfect storm with this novel,
She's also tapped into the Sarah J. Maas fan base.
Yeah.
Which is, just rabid and huge. But but yeah, I mean, it's crazy. I just, kudos to her. That's incredible. But yeah, just as a note for how insanely popular this book was and is.
That got me thinking because, like, Mistborn came out a while ago.
Almost 20 years, yeah.
When did this?
Has it been that long?
Yeah, I think it's like 2007, I think, yeah. We'll try not to cry about that.
And Fourth Wing was originally published April 5th, 2023. So within 2 years, it's garnered over 2 million ratings. Yeah, that's really impressive. And actually, now I'm curious. ACOTAR has 3 million. So, yeah. And I mean, it's obviously got a few more years on Fourth Wing. So it was a meteoric rise. Meteoric, yes, that word for this book.
What did you think of this one, Panda? What would you have rated it?
I liked it way more than I thought I would. And we'll talk about the hype and whether or not it was accurate. Honestly, the hype discouraged me. Like, it dissuaded me from even trying this book. But then I found it in a free little library, and I was like, you know what? I'll just take it, and like, just in case, I'll try it. Maybe there is something to this. And then, on our Discord, it was like people did start talking about it. I was like, you know what? Why don't we just give it a try and make an episode out of it? So you two raised your hands and said, yes, we'll do this. And here we are. I think my rating would be, it's not quite 4 stars. I do have some qualms with it. So I would say like a high 3 stars, maybe 3.75. Okay, we've been circling around this. So what was your expectation of the book? And did the book meet your expectations? Why? Why not? But also, let's talk about the hype. Like, how aware of the hype were you? And do you think the hype was accurate? Mirlya, why don't we start with you? Can you remember back to over a year ago when you first read this book?
Yeah, so I read the book when it was shortly after it was released. I was fully aware of the hype at the time because it was hyped before it was released. So all of their ARC readers hyped it up. And in all of the circles that I followed, it was being hyped. And then the people who were reading it were saying it's worth the hype. So it was getting even more hyped at the time. And I picked it up and did a bit of a buddy read with some of the people in a different Discord. And we all thought that it was worth the hype. And I think that it fulfilled the expectations of the book from the way that they marketed it. And it also filled, like I said before, it filled a little bit of a void in books where books of this type of genre either fall flat because they're not written well, or they're trying too hard to be something else. And so this book is, I'm not going to lie, it is tropey, it is predictable. It is not a groundbreaking world-building novel, but it's a fast-paced, easy read. You don't need to think about it. You just go along for the ride type of book. And I think that's what makes it appealing to so many readers.
Yeah, I don't know exactly where people got this sense that it would be groundbreaking, because at least for me, the kind of hype that I've heard is like it wasn't that it was groundbreaking. It was just that it was fun. It was a fun read. And so the reviews that I've seen, especially the lower ratings, they're like, this is not groundbreaking. It's totally rehashing like concepts and plots and tropes from others that came before. I'm like, yeah, that's a lot of books. But I felt like there was some of its own personality in it as well, especially when it came to some of the character dynamics. And then for me, I think the hype was semi-accurate. I don't think it was completely accurate. By the way people talked about this book, I thought this was going to be way more romance heavy. And actually, I should say way more smut heavy than fantasy. And that's just really not the case to me. In fact, there's only 2 explicit scenes in the book. And the majority of it is sexual tension. It's that like slow burn, that would they, won't they, but they will. And I found myself actually enjoying a lot more of the fantasy world building than I expected. I hear the complaints about certain things about like how the dragons work, and why didn't they just invent a saddle earlier and things like that, or like the high death rate in this book, like that could have totally been prevented. And like, okay, I hear you, but at the same time, having read this, I'm like, okay, I get, I think I get what the author was trying to go for. And I think first and foremost, this is an action book. If you take away like the fantasy elements, if you take away the romance elements, like it primarily is action. So that's my thoughts. What about you, Seth?
Yeah, I mean, I live under a rock in our Discord server, and so I hadn't really engaged with the greater world about this book. I had absolutely no idea. I hadn't even read the flap in my hardcover about what it was about when I started reading it. So I went in
You were a blank slate.
blind, which for me, perfect way to do this book, because I think if I had gone in with any maybe preconceived notions, it might have, I don't know if it would have landed as well as it did. But the only thing I think maybe that I had in the back of my mind is I was expecting more explicit stuff. And so I kind of, and for me, I think the tension was the right way to go. I think I ended up enjoying that a lot more. She wasn't just plastering this stuff all over the book. Like that just wouldn't have been my cup of tea. So I didn't have any expectations. So I guess in that way, it definitely exceeded it when you have nothing and then you come away with something. That's all. But
so your bar was low.
Yeah, I've been hurt by popular books before. I think we can all raise our hand in that support group, and and so I'm always a little leery. But I famously, or not so famously, I read A Court of Thorns and Roses, which I think this is probably a good parallel to in some ways. I was completely bored by that book. This book, I was not bored by. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Tamlin fans or whoever's out there that likes that one, but this was a lot different, and I enjoyed it a lot more. And I would read the second one. I don't know if I'd go out of my way, but like I would, read the second one of this. And sorry, Moss fans.
I agree with you about ACOTAR. That one was way more boring than this one.
I think, again, it depends on what you go into that one expecting. I went into a Court of Thorns and Roses expecting a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and that's what I got. And I thoroughly enjoyed it.
I ended up enjoying it more than I thought I would. But I also got more than I thought I would get with that one. Anyway, wait, so Seth, did you know about the dragons at all? Or like the military school setting going into
I had
this?
no
Or
idea
just
about the military school setting. It was hard to not know about the dragons because they're on the
okay,
cover. But yeah, I mean, I about as blind as you can be. I had absolutely
gotcha.
zero clue. I didn't even know. It took me about 3 pages into the book to realize that I was reading a female POV. I didn't even know, like, anything. So
Okay. We do have some listener questions, and basically they were just saying, "Is it any good?" From some gamer. Is it any good? Is it good at what it's trying to be? And Nat also asked, "Should I read this book? Do you understand what makes it so popular?" And she also asked, "If romance is the primary aspect of it, would it have worked without fantasy? If not, is the fantasy in it improved by romance?" And we've answered quite a bit of this already, so I'll say, talking about the romance without getting into spoilers, do you think that it is the romance could the romance have worked without the fantasy, or is the fantasy improved by the romance?
I actually think, and we'll get into this in spoilers, but I think particularly with this story, the romance is improved because of the fantasy and the way the fantasy is tying into that romance in a pretty major way in the plot. At least for me, that's how I took it. There's a level of connection that's deeper than like what you and two humans talking without magic could achieve.
I agree. I don't think that romance is necessarily the main part. It's definitely not the only part. And at the heart of it, it's about a girl who has been perceived as weak her whole life and realizing that she's actually stronger than she's led to believe. And she really just needed opportunities to spread her wings and really test herself. So I think I agree with you that the romance is made more interesting because of the world building. Mirlya, what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely agree with the concept that the romance is made better by the world building and the fantasy aspects of the book. I do feel like from a relationship perspective, this book follows the standard outline of a romance novel where the love interest gets introduced early on and the author sets up a amount of tension between the two characters, and depending on what sort of a trope we're going for in this romance world, in this particular case it's an enemies to lovers trope, to create whatever tension and connection between the two characters. I have a couple of thoughts which I'll delve into a little bit more in the spoilers with regards to this relationship, but I do feel like there are multiple layers of how this book progresses. As you said, it is primarily an action book. It is also a romance book. It is also a fantasy book. And it kind of combines all of these elements together in a way that I think has actually been done quite well comparatively to some other books that try to do the same thing.
Nice. I agree. I did note this when I was reading it. Can we take a moment to appreciate that there is male birth control in this world? I don't know if you caught that.
Yeah,
Um,
kind of later in the book, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I have not read every, book in the world, but just based on my experience, it tends to be the female writers who actually think about these things and incorporate it into their books.
Pull
We
off these
did,
spoiler gloves here and just
yeah, I know. There is a little bit more in the non-spoiler section. Okay, let's talk about the genre real quick.
hmm.
So we talked about it being fantasy, romance, romantasy, but there is also that newer emergence of new adult as a way of categorizing books. I think, Mirlya, you had asked the question, is this book YA or adult? Do you want to expand on what you think this book is?
I put this question in there, but I am of the opinion this fits into that category in between young adult and adult called new adult, which the way that I kind of see new adult books and the way that in the new adult books that I've read, because a lot of the circles that I've kind of read in very much these days are focusing in that new adult space. They read very much like a young adult book in that they're fun, they're quick, they don't take a lot of brain power. They're not necessarily trying to teach you life stories, but they may have some life stories in the mix and in there. But in terms of the actual content that they put into those books, they're targeting a slightly older audience. In a lot of cases, it is that slightly more explicit romance. Some of them, it may be the slightly darker themes that are talking about life and death scenarios and things like that, that potentially may be a little bit too deep and dark for a younger audience. But I think this book fits into that sort of new adult space, because I don't know that I would necessarily consider this a full adult book, other than the fact that it has the explicit content in it.
And Seth, any experience with new adult there?
I mean, I think this is it. At some point, I think I even asked in our little, chat about this, like, what would we even consider this? Because to me, it reads, yeah, I mean, I guess I agree with everything you just said. It kind of reads like, all right, there's a lot of YA feel to it, but then, we definitely cross some lines where it's like, okay, maybe, there's a lot of violence in this book, an insane amount of violence, honestly. And then, you have the explicit sexual stuff. So yeah, I mean, and she is dealing with, a lot of themes that I think apply to both adults and, young adults as well, self-worth and things like that. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess I disagree wholeheartedly. I don't have any experience with new adult other than maybe this book. And if A Court of Thorns and Roses falls into that, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it's all kind of like wishy-washy. ACOTAR was sold as a YA fantasy novel. But I think the lines get blurred. And honestly, I think it's because there's just more awareness and publishers recognize that there is this in-between like YA and full-on adult audience. And I think it tends to be based on the phase of life of, what the main characters are going through, and doesn't necessarily have to be the target, like the reader audience, but just the kinds of topics, emotions, priorities that the characters are going through. Okay, last question before we get into spoilers. Would you recommend this book? If so, who would you recommend this book to? What do you think, Seth?
I mean, I would definitely give a copy of it to Huron on Discord.
He read it.
He's already read it.
Just because I think he needs another one.
Read it again. You'll like it better the second time.
I don't know who I would recommend it to in my daily life. I'm not around people I think they would appreciate this book probably for what it is and what it's trying to do. But if someone came up and was asking for recommendations, as they often do in like our Discord server, and they were like, I love this kind of thing that, maybe match that vibe, I would throw it out. Yeah. I mean, I don't think I think it's worth your time if you're looking for a book like that. It's also, mine was on Kindle Unlimited too. So like, if you're already subscribed to something like that, it's really low risk kind of book to pick up because it's already part of that, a subscription service like that or whatever. And so,
would you recommend this as like a gateway into fantasy for somebody who is newer to fantasy?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I got into fantasy books at like a pretty young age, and so I think that this has a lot of. I'd feel comfortable handing it to a semi-younger audience, or something like that. If someone's trying to get into the genre, or one of the big things that I love about fantasy is kind of its escapist nature. You can just turn the brain onto like low power mode and just not be a part of planet Earth for a while. And this book is perfect for that, I think. Where it's just like Mirlya, where it's a roller coaster ride. I think that's a perfect metaphor for this. You get on the roller coaster do I care how the roller coaster was made, what it looks like? Not really. It's got pretty flashing lights. It's really fast. It's really fun. We're all over the place, and then it's done, and it's perfect for that.
Nice. What about you, Mirlya?
So I definitely would recommend this book, but obviously I don't recommend it to everyone. So if you're a romance reader or a romantasy reader or a Sarah J. Maas reader, definitely. If you're the sort of person that is looking for something more epic in the world building style of something like Malazan or Brandon Sanderson, maybe not. But having said that, there are people who read both and have enjoyed both, and I think there's elements of this book that introduce fantasy in a way that's accessible to people who don't read fantasy. And I think that's part of the reason that the book has been appealing and has had so many ratings and become so popular. For me, some of the books that I read from a fantasy perspective when I was younger, Australian authors, so they don't really have a huge coverage in the greater world, so I probably won't mention who they are. A lot of those fantasy books did have this relationship and romance flair to it that when I then picked up some of those bigger epic fantasies, I felt like it was a little bit lacking. So this sort of fits very much into the sort of book and the sort of writing that I really enjoy, which, I'm the perfect target audience for this particular book. Yeah.
I echo what you said. For me, when I was reading it, definitely like the vibes of Red Rising, the original trilogy. I have to qualify that. Divergent, Hunger Games, and Tamara Pierce, like you were saying, it reminded me of those books. So I would say if you're a reader who enjoyed the majority of those books, those kinds of books, especially with found family, a bit of more dystopian nature, there's a lot of action, a school setting, a protagonist really figuring out like who she is or who they are, then I say give it a try. Okay, we spent a lot of time in spoiler free. Let's get into spoilers.
Did we want to talk about whether we consider this a smut book or not in the spoiler free section?
Well, do you want to add any thoughts about that? We kind of covered it a bit, but you want to expand?
I just wanted to expand on the idea of a smut book versus a romance book.
Sure.
And how they are different.
Yeah.
Because in my opinion, this is not a smut book. And it fits the category of romance more than it does smut. Romance can have smut in it, and the level of smut can depend on how the author wants to position their particular book. But I wouldn't categorize this as a smut book. Because what tends to happen in smut books is you get the smut and the explicit content very early on, not 3/4 of the way in.
Well, also that is like the core of the actual book as opposed to anything else. Like I would assume that if you're reading a book for smut, you're gonna breeze past anything else that's any sort of lead up to it.
You get enough of an idea of who the characters are to form some kind of a connection, but the idea of a smut book is not for the plot.
No, it's not. Good expansion. Okay, well, speaking of the smut, so going into spoilers, what did you think about the romance? Was it hot? Like, did it do it for you? And Kip asks, how good is the sex? Seth, want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, if you ask Violet, it's great. I thought
it was electric.
I thought it was really good. Fantasy. I had just finished Dust of Dreams by Steve Erickson just before this.
Same kind of thing.
Has a really kind of awful sexual assault in it. Light spoilers for that. Major spoilers, I don't know. And so this was great. I thought, I love the build up. This didn't happen until three-quarters of the way through the book. It was pretty late, the first sex scene. It totally worked for me. I loved it. It wasn't anything crazy other than, we've kind of, this tension has got to a point where it's boiled over. Sex scene has happened. It's nice in the year of our Lord 2024 that like no one got thrown through a wall. There was no like crazy violence. No one was harmed in the making of this sex scene. And it was great. I thought it was good. To answer Kip's question, thought it was hot. I was like, walking outside, just airing out a little bit after. But yeah, no, I mean, it was. I think it's clear that she's written this before, and has been good at it.
Yeah.
And that really shone. Like that chapter in particular, I thought was super well done. I think the tension, she did a great job dancing the line with that tension all the way up until it happened. I have absolutely zero complaints about the sex scene.
I did appreciate the lack of cheesiness by trying to describe body parts in certain ways. If you've read cringy romance novels, you probably know what I'm talking about. So I appreciated that. Mirlya, what do you think?
I agree. I thought that the scenes were written quite tastefully. There is a line between writing really cringy smut and tasteful romance, and I think she very much made the romance and the sex scenes tasteful. I said, from what Seth said, there were no people harmed in it. There were a few objects harmed in the making of the scene.
A couple of armoires, maybe a chair, some windows.
Sometimes things happen and there are
some
casualties.
Trees caught on fire.
Well, that goes back to the romance being better because of the magic, right? We have an extra layer here.
Yeah, that is true. It's something that you said, Mirlya, about the difference between smut and romance. I think that really does hit the nail on the head in terms of like what this book does well, is that it wasn't so much focusing on like the acts, the sexual acts. It was more focusing on the emotions and the desire of the characters for each other, the connection that they were having. And yes, it was obviously like, I mean, they were having sex, but it wasn't so much trying to describe the acts and playing that up. I did have a qualm about the sex scenes though, and I did see this in a couple of reviews, which is given Violet's medical condition, which we haven't really talked about yet. So Violet talks about how, she has like weaker joints and like she has like she gets hurt more easily, whether it's bruises or breaking of arms, just growing up. She's like physically a bit more fragile. And so the slamming against the furniture and the aggressiveness of the described sexual acts, like it's like, okay. There was a little disconnect between what we are told about her condition and how aggressive they were.
I feel like the training, because again, we don't get to the sex scene until about 3/4 of the way through the book.
That is true.
The level of training that she's done, she needs to survive on a sparring mat. And I feel like the level of violence that goes through a sparring mat is not going to be any worse than what happens in the bedroom.
Maybe it would be worse than what happens in the bedroom, since somebody did actually try to kill her. That's fair. Yeah. And maybe that's why also the author chose to have some of these things happen later after more development for the character. All right. What did you let's talk about the world building, because in the reviews I see it all over the place. The world building was great. The world building was terrible. Same thing about the characters. The characters are two-dimensional. They're really flat, or the characters are great. Did the world building make sense? Was it compelling? And more specifically, what did you think about the dragons? Because they play a pretty big role in this world. What did you think about that and how the magic worked in this world? Mirlya, you want to go first?
I enjoyed the world building. I think she managed to create a world that is a fantasy world, but yet we can somewhat identify with. It's a small little continent that or the small little pocket of the continent that we are exposed to. And whilst the politics and the way that the world has been put together is sort of a little bit predictable in terms of plot and setting and possibly a little bit tropey as well, I think that she's done a good job of incorporating the magic and the dragons, who I think some of the storytelling got better after the dragons were introduced, particularly when you consider that you've got the mind connection between rider and dragon and the way that the dragons can then communicate with their riders and, throw in these little snarky comments every so often, particularly between, a 100-year-old dragon and his grumpy old fart self and this little fledgling dragon.
Oh, and Dara.
Who is a lot more innocent and childlike and just so adorable.
Yeah. Seth, what do you think?
For me, the world building was probably the part of the book I had the biggest problem with.
Okay.
It didn't ruin the enjoyment for me, but I definitely went a little deeper in my suspension of disbelief than I probably normally have to go. So now that we're fully in spoilers, just to lay it out, if for some reason you're listening to this and haven't read, the book starts off with them going to this military school, which is all cool, and it's got dragons, and I'm into that. But everyone's conscripted, and we don't have a great sense really at all until kind of the end, I feel like, of who the enemy is in this story. From a 30,000 foot view, why is this war happening? Who are we fighting? What's the objective here? I was in the military for a long time, so maybe I read this with a different eye because, I came from that life. But yeah, attrition, I've seen the attrition rate talked about a lot online. That's something to me that's all right, typically in military units, you want a lot of cohesion, working together, teamwork, camaraderie. And a lot of that's forged through, trials and tribulations. And to me, that was probably the hardest part to wrap my head around with the world building is all right, you guys are at this military academy, you're in the Riders Quadrant, and you're totally fine with killing each other throughout this schooling. No one cares. These professors have the easiest job in the world. They just hand out assignments, they go hang out somewhere and just let anarchy ensue. And there's 2 rules you can't violate,
can't kill somebody in their sleep.
In their sleep. Yeah. Okay. And really what that means is you can't get caught trying to kill someone in their sleep, which is kind of what we see in the book with one of the wing leaders, right?
Yeah, Amber.
And so that part was really hard for me because I was you're telling me that these people are just straight up trying to murder each other, claw their way to the top of some hierarchical structure, and then flip a switch, and then they're working as a team all of a sudden against some enemy. And I'm that's tough because you could be shoulder to shoulder with someone who axed your friend legitimately a week ago. And so what happened was I got to a certain point in the book and I said, you know what, Seth? I don't care. I'm just going to have fun with this. I just don't care.
Yeah.
I'm just going to have fun because I like dragons, and these dragons are sweet. They've got magical powers. Some of them have scorpion tails and sword tails. I mean, it's super extra and it's a lot of fun. And I'm heck yeah, I want a dragon with a scorpion tail. How cool would that be? And imagine if you saw that dude flying out of the sky, pee my pants. And so that's the thing. If you want to get caught up in the world building in the story, I get the gripes. A lot of them I totally understand. But I don't think that's what the story's trying to do. And this is Rebecca's first fantasy story, right? And that transition's got to be a little hard, maybe, or, I think as the series goes on, I trust her to fine tune some of that world building to, maybe make me believe it a little more, But at the end of the day, I don't care. That's not what this book was for me. This book, kind of like you said, Panda, was an action story that had a lot of, a lot of sexual tension, on everyone wants to sleep with everyone all the time. I had a question for you guys because I didn't realize this until later, but I should have asked this early on, but what age did you think that these characters were in the book if they hadn't told you? Because I would have thought like, oh, these people are teenagers, right? The level of horniness is super high. Like,
I mean, I would say that doesn't necessarily go away.
no,
Even
it
in your
doesn't go away. But
20s.
some of the like the rash, like I have a problem with this person, I want to kill them. Like that reeks of maybe not as much maturity.
Well, I have you met people today? I mean,
To
Yeah,
be
well, okay.
fair, I feel like a majority of the people who were actually in the school were not out there to kill each other. There were a couple, and they had specific targets because they thought that they were liabilities.
yeah.
And so they were trying to then, cull the tail end of their group as a whole, essentially.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Anyway, enough of me ranting about world building. What did you think about it, Panda?
No, that was good. I think one thing to note is that for the writer quadrant, with the exception of the Children of the Rebellion, they are volunteers. So these are people saying, "I want to have a chance to bond it with a dragon and become a writer." Huron fan did ask, "What is your headcanon for why there is so much murder allowed? Slash, how the evil empire doesn't care about the people they want to train." He also asked, why are the people they're so scared of rebelling given dragons? So my thing was, initially I was annoyed that this world and society was just fine with all the like seemingly unnecessary death. However, I thought about it some more, and can find a logical explanation. It's not explicitly said, but some parts of it were more explicit. The writers quadrant is a military college, and I mean, this is set in a different world. It's not exactly like a mirror of a military that I'm familiar with. But I just think, okay, fine, it's a military college. What are they doing? They're training these people to be weapons. It's also not a utopian society, really. It felt more dystopian, and due to the dangerous threat, yes, it's quite vague, and that was intentional. She intentionally kept it vague as to what the threat to the kingdom was. But we know, okay, there's this danger to the kingdom. It does make sense that the kids have to grow up a bit quickly. And I mean, I don't know what the life expectancy of the society is, but the military school, it's not just like teaching the military tactics or the strategy or like the physicality you have to train for. I can see there's also the psychological and the emotional components, and death is a reality. It doesn't care who you are. It'll take anyone and everyone. And the brutalness of the whole rider quadrant thing, it doesn't sugarcoat death. Like the first death we see on page is Dylan, this kid, right? Seems like a kid, young person, we'll call him, was so like looking forward to the future. He was going to marry his sweetheart, and boom, he's gone. And the moment he came on the page, I was like, this guy's not going to make it. But anyway, like you could say that, oh, why didn't they put like a net under the parapet so that if people fell, sure, they don't make it into the right quadrant, but they could go into a different quadrant. I mean, that could be obviously an option. But in war, there's not necessarily going to be a safety net. And I think the real fear of falling to your death was part of that challenge. It's not just can you make it across, but it's can you deal with that fear. And for those that couldn't, that's it. But for those that succeeded, I think it helps strengthen them psychologically that they overcame that challenge. And I think we learn later in the book, like the kingdom isn't exactly a humanitarian sort of kingdom. So to me, it aligns with what the leaders of the kingdom are like, where they would rather cull those who they think are not, who those who think they are worthy but aren't. And one way to think about it is like, okay, for those who do make it and rise to the top, they are the most badass, most ruthless, who can get the job done. So, and I did pull a quote from the book where Xaden is talking to Violet, and he says, people die. It's going to happen over and over again. It's the nature of what happens here. What makes you a writer is what you do after people die. So that's my take. That is how I have reconciled that initial annoyance to now I'm like, okay, fine.
So I have a couple of comments about the parapet.
Yeah.
When I first read this book, I don't know American imperial measuring system. I don't know what inches are. So I read it's 18 inches wide and I'm like, cool. And then for this podcast, I actually looked it up. It's approximately 45 centimeters. And then I thought about it a little bit harder and then I was like, but the Olympic gymnastics beam is about 4 inches wide. I was thinking that it was closer to a beam than it was, longer than a standard sized ruler. And so I'm like, actually, that's not very narrow at all. I don't know what these people are
Speak for yourself, because that would terrify me, and I would 100% have died on the parapet.
I would have died. I would so not have made it because of the fear. It's not because I can't walk across the parapet.
Yeah, no, I just 100% the fear. I agree. Yeah. Nope. No.
I guess just from my perspective, I'm not a particularly large person, and I looked at that and I'm like, 45 centimeters across. I could lie on that and quite comfortably.
Crawl across it.
I could lie on that quite comfortably and not feel like I'm going to fall off the sides. Like, I don't know about it. But in terms of why I think that I think it comes down to the fact that the people who enter the Riders Quadrant, other than the Children of the Rebellion, they're all volunteers. They've all trained for it. You hear about a lot of these people who have actually entered. Their parents have set up their own courses at home to help them try and get through the various trials and tribulations of the courses. And so, they train their whole lives to enter this Riders Quadrant. So it's not like they're going in there and they're being forced into this death school and they don't want to be there, other than in potentially Violet's case initially because her mother has essentially forced her there, or the Children of the Rebellion. But the Children of the Rebellion also have a reason why this isn't necessarily a bad thing. And that goes into what happens, towards the end of the book, and the information that we find out about why they're actually there is, Xaden's made a deal.
Right.
And he's actually saved their lives. So
at least given them a chance.
He's given them a chance. And initially, what is actually, in terms of answering the second part of the question, is why the people, they're so scared of rebelling given dragons, is it's explained at the very start of the book, is that the leaders didn't think that the dragons would bond the Children of the Rebellion. And so they were banking on the high risk nature of the quadrant itself, basically killing them. And then them not having to worry about that. I mean, from a leadership perspective, they wanted all of those Children of the Rebellion dead anyway. So they're like, well, throw them into the quadrant that has the highest death rate and see how they go. But they initially didn't think that the dragons would accept them, which I thought was a bit odd given the people that the dragons did end up bonding. One in particular, I have questions about the thought process of that dragon, and the fact that the dragons bond people, and then, unlike Violet's dragon, I'm not going to pronounce names because I'm going to butcher them. So, unlike Violet's dragon, every time Violet falls off her dragon, he will catch her. Whereas other riders, they bond their dragons, they go for their first flight, they fall off, they ride their dragons, just like, oh well.
Yes.
But then they talk about how strongly dragons bond, and I'm kind of just like, but so I understand that Violet's dragon is 100 years old. He forms stronger bonds with his riders, but at the same time, there is this period where their bond hasn't fully snapped into place. And yet there are these other dragons that pick up a rider, their rider falls off. They're like, well,
Oh,
moving on
well.
to the next one.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of like,
I kind of think it is that, not all dragons are the same. They all have their own personality, and some are probably like more caring than others. And I mean, the whole thing about Violet and Taryn and how she's even able to bond with Andarna is because she's special. She is the chosen one. No, I'm just kidding. But she is special, and it's that she's not physically strong. She's mentally sharp. She's the smartest. She can use her wits. And she's more caring. And I guess that was the quality that Taryn and Andarna valued more than, brutal strength and jackassery or whatever. Yeah. I do think that, initially, right? So if you think about it, initially it was, okay, Xaden's the one that helped make that deal. And the leaders were like, well, he's probably just going to die. So fine, whatever, no harm. But then he ends up bonding with a pretty powerful dragon. And I think that kind of just negates anything that they would try to do to then just murder the rest of the rebellion children. So they basically have to stick to the deal as opposed to back out of it. So that's my reconciliation of.
There is also a whole lot more going on within that leadership team that can't really be discussed because there's spoilers for the next book.
Apparently, yeah, as we see towards the end.
My thought, I still think it's a stupid decision by the Empire to have let these rebellion kids. But my headcanon actually, I think, tracks with the book, because we get towards the end of the book and you realize, all right, this empire that we're living in is kind of very totalitarian, controlling a lot of information, doing a lot of this stuff, right? They're, I think it's pretty explicitly said, right? That's the type of place we're living in by the end of the story, right? Okay, this empire is not what maybe we thought it was, right?
Mm-hmm.
Violet's own brother, very, very end of the book, spoiler, right, is not only alive, but has,
switched sides.
Switched sides. And I think it's the nature of Totalitarian, empires, governments, whatever, to maybe not make the best decisions about their people, right? Something about all of human history might say that is the case. And once we got to that point, I was like, all right, this tracks, right? These people aren't making the greatest decisions all the time because they have an ulterior motive somewhere, right? And we don't necessarily know what that motive is, I don't think.
Yeah.
And that adds a lot of ambiguity to things. And so then I was like, okay, that tracks. And, maybe they did just want him dead and they thought this would be the easiest way. But,
kind of wash their hands of it. Sure, we gave you a chance.
Which is totally true. This happens all the time in the world, and then there's these unintended consequences of that, and then that turns into them becoming a tight-knit group, these rebellion people, and they're looking after each other, they're meeting after hours. They are the most effective military part of the Riders Quadrant that we see.
Yeah, that's true. The whole thing about how no more than 3 rebellion people can meet together because of Melgren's limitations of his power. I think that was a little much, but yeah, I would not be surprised if it was later on revealed that the deal that was made with Xaden was a compromise because there was somebody in leadership that felt bad about killing the kids outright. So maybe that'll be my prediction for something to be revealed in the later books. Is somebody felt bad enough, they're like, you know what, how about this? How about instead of just killing them, let's just put them through the Riders Quadrant.
My prediction is that Violet and Brennan's mom tried to have him killed.
Try to have Xaden killed?
Brennan.
Oh.
The healer brother. I think she was on to him. She's clearly a pretty cutthroat mom, right? She's like, Violet, you and your disabilities and your love of being a scribe, screw that. Here's the 18-inch parapet and good luck to you and Godspeed.
Okay, I'm going to say it's the opposite. That's my prediction, is that she's like too stoic and too distant. I bet she has a lot of secrets outside of that Brennan is alive, and she is somehow coordinating things to happen in the future, and Violet plays a role in it.
Yeah.
Gonna throw that out there. Mirlya's just sitting there like,
She's trying so hard to hold it in.
Yep,
She's
can't
like,
say anything because she's already read the sequel. Okay, let's talk about characters since we're getting there anyway. Kieran Fan asks, why is Dane the most reasonable person until he's not? Okay, so let's just talk about Dane. We haven't actually talked about. Dane is Violet's best friend. They grew up together. He knows her better than anybody else. He is the one that she confides in. There are no secrets between them. But he is a year older, and so he joined the Writers' Quadrant. And so they had this year apart. And now they're both in the Writers' Quadrant, and Dane is like, what the hell are you doing here? You are not going to survive. I need to get you out of here. And, Violet's like, oh, it's so nice to be back with you. Maybe we can move past friendship. Anyway, thoughts about Dane?
Yeah, so Dane's annoying. Is going to be my first thing. Dane's annoying. But I think Kieran is on to something, at least with the first part of this. Like, I think his initial reaction is super reasonable because it's clear that Violet has been working towards and wanting to be a scribe probably for her whole life up to this point.
Yeah.
That's kind of what her dad did. That's, how they bonded. She's really into that. The scribe masters even anticipated her coming in and being like a star pupil. And so and then he's also probably very intimately familiar with her disabilities. So when he sees her in the Writers' Quadrant and these people are ruthless, he's like, whoa, what the heck, right? It's not like it sounds like they hadn't really even communicated in a year.
Right.
So I think
because there's this policy where first years can't, write letters home.
So I think his initial reaction is super reasonable. Like, holy crap, A, great to see you, but B, what the heck? How did this happen?
Get the hell out of here.
Yeah. You don't belong here. And not in a rude way. I didn't read that. But at a certain point, he becomes pretty one note because he just can't let it go, right?
Yeah.
It's become clear at a certain point that Violet has made some mental shift and said, no, I'm doing this. I'm going to do this. I'm set on doing this. I'm letting the scribe thing go, right? She feels like she has some sort of obligation to her family, to herself, to her sister. And Dane just doesn't let it go. It's like a dog with a bone. And it's exhausting. Like, I wanted him to just get punched in the face because it's like, look, dude, she's a grown-ass woman and she's making a decision. And if you're really her friend, you'll back her play, right? Like, and the best friend in this whole book, not to bring someone else in this conversation, is Liam. Because Liam worries about Violet, right? And he's looking after her. And it's not just a job for him. Like, Zayden has kind of has asked him to look after her and all this. And he literally dies.
Right.
Saving, because he saves her at the end. That's a friend, right? And Dane should take some freaking notes. And it's exhausting. Like, he just, at a certain point, every time I got in the scene, I was like, oh boy, here we go again. And I read the last of it pretty fast, but I'm pretty sure he totally screwed Violet over in the end, right? Like, he took her memories. Yeah. So then he just becomes a total, a-hole and just.
Yeah.
But it sucks. I wish he had a little more nuance. Like, I wish, it would have been interesting to me for her to really tease that out and say, like, Violet does feel really conflicted. And, there's this super relatable but very sad scene too, like where she kisses Dane and she's like, I didn't feel anything like I thought I would. And then, how do I let someone down like that? That's like I think something a lot of people can relate to in life. But yeah, Dane sucks. I think Rebecca did him dirty a little bit, but it's all right. That's my rant. So I agree with you, and I think his initial reaction is good, and then he just becomes completely unreasonable and a total jerk, and he can't take being shot down by Violet, and and just being a friend and being accepting of the fact that, you know, she's helping out doing this thing, and, you know, you just got to back her play.
I think that this is where the writing is the weakest, in that there's a lot of telling as opposed to the showing. So we're
Yes.
being told that they're best friends. We're being told that, you know, there are no secrets between them. We're being told that Dane cares about her and all these things. It's not shown as much, the connection between the two. And so I think that's part of the reason why there is this reaction of like, he's so flat, and becomes just a one note character. Mirlya, what do you think?
So I agree that initially Dane is reasonable and appears to have Violet's best interests at hand. But then when Violet's interests change, Dane doesn't change with him. And I think that there's some key moments and some key quotes from Dane where it's all about saving Violet, but it's not about encouraging Violet to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is the key issue with Dane as a character. And Xaden points it out multiple times, where there is a point in the book where Xaden says to Dane she could use a little less protection and a little more instruction, because at this point in time, you know, Violet is fully invested in finding her way in the Riders Quadrant, and she wants to stay. And Dane is all about still trying to get her out, but also trying to protect her from everything that's in the Riders Quadrant, which isn't going to help her at all make it through the Riders Quadrant. So there is a little bit of red flags and toxicity from that perspective. Like, it's a different type of toxicity potentially to what Xaden may have in terms of his character. But in terms of a healthy relationship, is that he needs to understand that Violet has changed and Violet continues to change. And in order to help Violet, protecting her is not the way to go. And I think that it becomes apparent in the I've got a list here. So initially, when Dane tells the healer not to get the mender, the magical healer, to fix Violet's shoulder the first time her shoulder gets broken by someone on the sparring mat, because his reasoning is that she'll be too injured to become a rider, so then the scribes will take her back.
Right,
and that's
right.
just like, no, like, you don't want someone to be injured, even though like they're there because he says we don't want her to be in pain, but then he wants her to stay injured. Like, where is the logic in that, honestly? Like, I guess honestly, her next quote is that she doesn't stand a chance if she goes back in there in a cast and has to defend herself while her shoulder heals from reconstruction surgery. And I'm like, yes, but if there is the possibility of being able to heal it, that will put her in better stead to be able to defend herself, which is better for her than not. And then the quotes I found very much started to become more about Dane and him not wanting to lose Violet as opposed to helping Violet grow.
Yeah.
And it felt like it was very much about Dane. This is Dane doesn't want to lose Violet, so Dane's going to do everything to try and put Violet in a bubble and keep her to the side and never let her grow. And Violet's sitting there going, he needs to realize I'm not a liability. I can actually do this. I'm not as weak as you think I am. And Violet bonds these two dragons, and Dane's still trying to convince her that she has to choose the weaker dragon because the weaker dragon will keep her safer. And I'm like, I'm sorry. In what world is a weaker dragon or a smaller dragon going to keep someone safer? And his reasoning for that is because she's too small to bear a rider at this point in time. It means that she won't be able to ride with a wing, so they'll have to keep her safe in this little school and, make her an instructor. And I'm kind of like, but that's not helping her grow. That's not helping her develop. It's stunting her growth. It's, preventing her from actually becoming a woman. She's already a woman. Becoming even stronger as a character. And it's there are parallels in this regard to one of the Sarah J. Maas characters where that particular character is all about trying to save this person from all of the world around her and, has almost lost this person once, so will do everything to keep them in a little bubble and not allow them to take any risks and go anywhere. And that's just, that's not a healthy relationship. That's not a healthy way to live. Like, you're your own person. You need to live and experience things, and you can only be protected to a certain point before you need to start experiencing things for yourself and learn how to deal with them yourself. And I feel like Dane just never allows that to occur with Violet. So I don't consider that he's the most reasonable character until he's not, because he starts off reasonable, but then he doesn't realize that Violet's changing and growing and developing, and he's holding her back.
But I think maybe what Kieran is saying is that the author's intentional choice of writing Dane that way is like a weak point of the storytelling, which I mean,
I think I agree with that.
I can see that point. But to all your points though, Mirlya, about like him being overprotective, him really being selfish, and him really just like he doesn't want to go through the pain of Violet dying rather than supporting Violet growth that she wants to have as a person, her having agency. I think in reality, there are relationships like that. So yes, it could be seen as a weak point in the storytelling, or it could also be seen as, okay, she's portraying these toxic relationships and giving light to why they are toxic.
I think that there is also the element of, Dane is pessimistic about it. He's always talking about how Violet's going to get herself killed. And I'm like, she's survived. And, she makes a good point. She's survived up until this point. She's bonded powerful dragons. She's made things work in the quadrant for herself.
Yeah.
And yet Dane is still all about how she's going to die.
Right. Well, but also it's like at some point it's okay, have what you were talking about, having that mindset shift of, okay, I get it. I can't dissuade you from leaving the writer's quadrant. Now I need to adapt to that and say, how can I help you so that you have the highest chance of surviving and being successful, which he doesn't do. And, the whole thing about like, would he break any rules to help Violet? And he says no. I think that just kind of sealed like who he is as a character or a person, and his priorities. And it said like his priorities are actually not Violet first. So does he really love her if he's not, Yeah. Okay. I think we kind of beat that one to death. Smutbet, you did have a question. Did Violet's nickname land for you? And since we all agree it didn't, why was it used unnecessarily?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that was terrible.
Or incessantly. Sorry.
I just don't. It didn't land. There's no way. There's no way that landed for anyone. I refuse
You don't
to
think
believe it.
Violence is a great nickname?
If he had done it as like a one-off and she was like, "Oh, that was kind of hot or funny or whatever reaction," but it's just all the time. They're having like an intimate moment and he's like, "Oh, Violence." And I'm like, "Dude, shut up." Like, you're taking me out of the mood, bro. Like, come on now. It's supposed to be spicy. And I don't know. There's a lot to like about Xaden as far as being a complex character in the story, but yeah, that part, come on, man. That was rough.
I thought it was cute the way he came up with it, though, because, Violet's first instinct for him was, she's been told that Xaden wants to kill her, so her first instinct is to defend herself, and that involves violence. So I thought that it was a cute nickname for her, but like I said in our little chat, every time I heard it and every time I thought of it, all I could think of was the League of Legends voice line. Please clip that into the episode.
V for violence.
Vi stands for violence.
Is it copyright? I think it's copyrighted. But do you think that the author came up with the nickname first and then backed her way into the name Violet, or you think it was the other way around?
I feel like she probably was writing and she was like, "Oh, this is clever and like witty." And again, if it had been a one-off, if maybe he was talking smack on the sparring net, like,
Yeah.
there is that kind of part of sexual tension that every relationship needs like the right ratio of roast to flirt.
Oh yeah,
like
the banter.
the banter. And so it could have been great. It's just that she beat me over the head with it, and I was like, just stop. Like,
well, violence and violets, it sounds pretty similar, so you can just pretend he's saying violets all the time.
yeah. The problem is part of this book I did on audiobook, so I was just literally being assailed with just,
I also listened to the audiobook, and I have to say, the audiobook narrator, she puts a like attitude in the
she's
reading.
Definitely got some sass.
Yeah, that I really appreciated, and I think I like the book more because of it. It's just if you read it in a more sassy tone, I think
my
you'd have a better
understanding
time.
was that they re-recorded the audiobook because about the first, I think it was like the first 16 chapters or something of the audiobook originally were really bad.
Oh.
But they re-recorded it because either there was some audio issues going on or the audiobook narrator was sick because it was something I never actually listened to the audiobook, but I heard that initially when the book was first released, the audiobook was terrible.
Oh, okay. Well, it's better now. At least the version on Spotify.
Yeah, I thought it was well done.
Oh. And you get to know how all the names are pronounced.
Yes, I don't know how they're pronounced. I think there's some Gaelic influence in them.
Yeah. There's like Segale.
Yeah, I think most of the dragons are Gaelic names, right?
Yeah. The Terran has a really long name that I'm not even gonna try. Okay. Closing our loop on characters, other characters or relationships that Violet's had that we want to discuss?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we haven't got to talk about Xaden much at all, and kind of the complex.
What you got?
Yeah, well, she has a lot of nuance in him that sadly Dane is very lacking. But he says there's something that I took note of pretty early on. He says Violet is sneaking out. She is trying to gather some like herbs and various things for poisons, essentially. She's going to poison her way to victory on the mats, which I thought was really clever, and I like that bit. But she inadvertently stumbles into a gathering of these rebellion people, which we know is a big no-no, allegedly. And there is a confrontation between her and Xaden in that scene. And Xaden goes, well, I wish I had the line in front of me because it's a really good one. But he basically is like, why would I hurt you? Like, I don't even know you, right? Like, I have to be able to live with myself. And that was great. Like right off the bat, like, all right, so clearly Xaden is a little more complicated, a little more complex, right? Like he is not a mustache twirling villain, right? And
that's Melgren.
Yeah, and unlike a lot of people in this story, he's not interested in attributing the sins of the parents to their children, right. Essentially, right? And of course he's not, because that's happened to him. But he says this really early on, and then Violet still is like, "Oh, Xaden wants to kill me, and like he'd be so mad at me." And it's like, no, if you listen to what the man said and his actions, right, like he's not interested in hurting you, but also like you could hurt him with this knowledge of these gatherings and stuff like that. And I thought that was a nice bit. It's pretty early on, but Xaden, I don't know if I would hang out with the dude like as a person, but he definitely, I think, is probably one of the most, if not the most complex character in the book to me. He has,
I would agree. Yeah.
A lot of different things that he's trying to juggle at the same time. He's trying to be like a wing leader. He's trying to, we find out that he essentially is like the leader of the rebellion people. And if any of them step out of line, he gets the axe, right?
Yeah.
Then,
and he knows that Brennan is alive.
he knows that Brennan's alive. Yeah. So, and which is huge. Obviously, he keeps that from Violet. And then, what was the last part I was going to say? Oh, his dragon is bonded with obviously with Violet's dragon, and so then now they are linked better or worse, for as long as they're bonded to these dragons, and so he has a ton of different things that he's trying to juggle, think about, and maybe not all those interests line up at the same time. So, I'm not saying he should have lied to Violet. I think that was a pretty scummy move, but it's at least believable, right? When you get to that part, I'm like, all right, I can see why. I don't agree with it, but like I can see why, and I appreciate that she put a lot of layers to the motives that are driving Xaden and the external factors that are pushing him in this story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, he's good. My favorite character is Liam, though I'm not trying to gush too much about Xaden. My boy Liam, which is actually my son's name. Shout out to my Liam.
Aww.
So
see, now
yeah,
you have to read the Tamara Pierce books.
I think they're probably on my
Liam
radar.
doesn't come in until late in those books.
There's only the I think it's the Alana, or is it the Kel? I can't remember.
It's
Alana trilogy or Quartet.
Yeah, he has a lot of complexity, and I don't know. I appreciate that. I think he's a good foil to Violet. I think it's part of why their romance works for me as well. It's just because he, there's a lot of layers to him. And then since we're on Xaden, I thought it was a really smart decision on her part to not give us a POV from him, right? He's always got this era of mystery. And then at the end of the book, my one qualm is she ruins that. She gives us a Xaden POV, and I'm like, I don't want this. Get him out of it. Go away. And that was the only time I was really frustrated. The ending, the last couple lines of the book obviously are a banger, and you're like, whoa, like what happened? Brennan's back. But just the fact that it was Xaden's POV, I was like, we don't need his POV. I don't want it.
Yeah.
I think his character's better without it. Thoughts on that? I don't know if you guys agree with me. Maybe.
I completely agree with you. I was like, what the hell is this? And it was not. I did not like it. And then it started, so in the audiobook version, that there are these like bonus short stories from Xaden's point of view, and I was just like, I cannot listen to this anymore. So I didn't. Mirlya, thoughts?
So I like Xaden as a character only because he fits my perspective of dark, broody male characters. But I what I didn't like about the relationship in this particular book was it was insta-lust bordering on insta-love.
Mm-hmm.
But then she was also trying to make it slow burn. So it was like this weird combination of slow burn and insta-love. And I'm like, what is going on here? And
it's instant attraction.
Instant attraction, insta-lust. I think that there's very much a horniness to her thoughts about Xaden right from the very start. There are some complexities to Xaden's character that I appreciated on my reread, having read Iron Flame, with a couple of things that get revealed in that book. But I also think that the relationship, if you can call it that, towards the end of the book, Violet yo-yoed way too quickly between I love you, oh my god, I hate you, you're a traitor, and I still love you, within the space of about 3 chapters, and it was like whiplash. The way that she was just like, I can't live without you. Oh my god, you're a traitor, you've just betrayed me, you've been lying to me. Which, to be fair, Xaden actually never did lie to her, it was lying by omission. Which is still, I guess, technically lying, but she was just not told the full story, and part of that was because of Dane, and her closeness with Dane, and his ability. So, Xaden's trying to protect himself and his little rebellion because he clearly knows that they're on the side of the world that is actually looking out for the rest of the world, as opposed to the little bubble that the school is set in, who are safe within their wards, so they don't care what's going on outside the wards. And in order to then protect himself and the rebellion, he doesn't tell Violet certain things, because Dane will find out, and Dane's, by the book, follows the rules. He's clearly told his father certain things, and it gets them into trouble. So I think that he does what he needs to do to survive, and there's always going to create that, tension between the two main characters in a romance novel. There's got to be something that happens.
Right. That miscommunication trope is just usually the case. Yeah. I don't really have that much more to say about Xaden. I enjoyed him for the character that he was, the role that he played. And it's nice that he's not, the villain, which I mean, it was pretty obvious earlier in the book that he wasn't going to be the villain. And I'm excited. I'm curious to see how this character evolves in the other books. Apparently 4 more to come. So,
Yep. So, Liam? Let's talk about Liam.
yeah. Oh.
He's that poor little cinnamon roll character.
Oh.
He was whittling his little dragons and his little figures.
Yeah.
Really, this world just didn't deserve Liam, and that's why he had to leave us. But yeah, he was great. He was, I think, inarguably the nicest and most genuinely good person in the story, I think.
There is a character in the original Red Rising trilogy that Liam very much reminds me of, and I cannot tell you who that character is because that is spoilers. But there is definitely this she doesn't pull the punches. Like, the author does not pull the punches when it comes to the deaths, and they're impactful. I think the way that Liam's death scene was written was well done. It showed the consequences of the bonding with the dragons, and the dragons are not invincible. They can very much die, and the pain that Liam was going through losing his dragon, and the pain that Xaden was feeling of losing Liam, like, just this big network of pain going on was, yeah. I did not shed a tear, but I was getting close.
She does do a lot of telling, not showing, but when she does decide to kind of let the scene breathe a little bit, like this one, I think it was really effective.
Yeah.
I even thought it was well done with the Violet stuff. Right after that, I liked the bits of her losing consciousness, and I'm a big sucker for like a Last Stand kind of stuff too. I'll admit that about myself, but yeah, that whole scene was really good. That back little bit of the book I thought was quite well done.
Yeah. Anything you want to add, Mirlya?
Not so much to Liam. I think that he was introduced relatively late in the piece, but he was such an impactful character in the small amount of time that we had with him that I can see why she did what she did, but at the same time, why did she do it?
Yeah. I wonder, so the character that I'm talking about in Red Rising, Pierce Brown, literally, he picked the name out of a hat. He was like, well, I need to kill somebody. Who's it going to be? Picks the name out of the hat, and he was like, well, crap. And he had like a whole arc that he was going to write about this character, and he had to scrap it all and was like, I got to stick by my rules. Otherwise, they mean nothing. And so he killed the character. Who knows if that's what happened with Rebecca? Maybe that's, she didn't mean to kill him, but he came out of the hat, and so she had to.
Well, I just think his death makes the most sense from an impact standpoint at this point in the story.
Yeah.
As sad as that is.
Yeah, because like Dylan, he was barely on the page and he was gone. Orally, she was starting to have an impact. The interactions with Violet, and then she was gone. And then there's like the kid who couldn't make decisions that the dragons was just like, you know what, I'm just gonna take you out. Which, surprised he even made it that far, honestly. I think that one was kind of just like a bit of a throwaway. But I agree with you, like Liam's death it actually really meant something. I mean, I think Orly's death also quite impacted Violet, but yeah, Liam's definitely was a huge punch. We didn't talk about Rhiannon. and I'm pronouncing her name like I would Rihanna, so I don't know if that's right, but Rhiannon. Any thoughts about her as a character?
I mean, I don't think we got a ton of. I think maybe Rebecca laid the seeds for her to be, a vital or a really important character going forward, potentially, like the foundations there. But I remember her and their interactions, but she felt like a very tertiary character in this story, at least through book one. I mean, she is
very much a supporting character.
Yeah, like she's definitely, providing Violet a little bit of stability and that kind of thing. But I mean, honestly, the biggest thing I remember about her is that she was hooking up with this one guy all the time, but they weren't a thing, but they were a thing, but they weren't a thing.
She was hooking up with Tara.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you guys think about the mustache twirlingly evil? Was it like Tucker or whatever his name was? He like throws the guy off the parapet in the very beginning. Jack. Yeah. Did he?
Okay.
He did not land for me at all. I was like, this guy's just evil for the sake of being evil. Like,
I thought there was going to be a reveal. I thought that there was going to be more to that character because in the beginning, there was a line about like Violet suddenly having a realization or something about him. And I was like, oh, okay, there's going to be a reveal about why exactly he is so like, I'm going to kill you, Violet. And that did not happen. Other than she's weak. And I thought there was going to be more to his story. Like, did her family piss off his family too? Like, I don't know. So I think that one was also just very flat characterization to help Violet's character and help plot move along.
Yeah, Jack is the one who I think I have questions about the thought processes of the dragon that chose to bond him. I appreciate that obviously some of the dragons respect violence more, but I feel like Jack was written unhinged more than he was violent. But I guess I put Rhiannon on the list there, and I just wanted to make a couple of notes that she is written as that loyal friend who I think is important in some of the romance books that get written, where you've got that female friend or possibly a gay friend that you could talk to about all of your problems. And
right.
I felt like the way that she was introduced right at the start, Violet gives up her boot to help Rhiannon cross the parapet. Like, doesn't even know this person, she's a stranger. They become close friends after that point. And I was really worried that Rhiannon was going to become either die or that she was going to end up betraying Violet in some respect. But she didn't. And in if anything, she actually helped Violet. She covered Violet. Violet was wearing Xaden's flight jacket at one point, and she's draped herself over it to try and cover up the insignias that are on the jacket, so that Dane wouldn't see that she'd been hooking up with Xaden. Like, I don't know. It's the sort of little touches of female friendship I think that she's put into the book that I appreciated and I quite liked.
And I would have to say, like, more realistic portrayal of female friendships than some stereotype.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely an expert on female friendships. So.
Yep. Yes, please tell us your thoughts, Seth.
No, I'm
just kidding.
Those are good touches. I kind of forgot about the jacket scene though. She is a good friend. I mean, I'd hang out with her. Like, she's a nice person, and a story that doesn't always have nice people in it. So
it kind of balances out all the broodiness and negativity. I know we've been going on for a while, but the last bits are, well, actually, is there something that you guys would like to focus on before we close out? Any last thoughts?
No. I mean, I think I've said what I hoped to say. Dane sucks. This book is fun. Just let it be fun. It doesn't have to be high art. And I might actually read the second one someday if we end up deciding do we want to cover it at some point or just because.
I'd be down. Yeah, I'd be down. Oh, I did have something. There are epigraphs in front of each chapter, at the beginning of each chapter,
Mhm.
talking about the storytelling. So I also saw reviews where it's like, oh my goodness, the like exposition is so sporadic, or the exposition is like too much or poorly done. I actually really like how a lot of the exposition was done. I thought the epigraphs, well, one, I actually read them and understood them, and two, they were nice touches to give you the information that you needed at the time. Like instead of trying to give you everything like a history book, it was drip feeding you a bit. And also the fact that because Violet was trained to become a scribe, the way to calm herself or focus herself was to recite historical knowledge. Um, was an I think yes, you could say that's a cheesy way to do exposition. I actually quite enjoyed that little touch.
Yeah, I liked it too. I thought the epigraphs were really well done as well. That's a good note.
Yeah.
It was a cool tie-in too because she actually gets handed the book in the story, and then we
Right.
start. Yeah, that was cool.
Yeah,
was a
the
cool
Book
bit.
of Brennan.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that whilst it is a little bit cheesy to have her reciting the info dumps at the start of the book, I felt like it was I've had another book that I am thinking of that the way that they info dumped the world building and the story and everything, it felt a little bit flatter than this is, the characterization, and it made sense for Violet to, this is what she knows, this is what she has trained for, this is what is familiar to her, so this is what's going to calm her down. Like, it kind of made sense in that respect as to throw it in that way and have the information presented to us in that manner. I think the other comment that I had that bugged me about this book was Violet in flight training and her insistence that she needed to stay on her dragon on her own, and that to me was just like.
But they got a saddle out of it. Mirlya.
They did get a saddle out of it, but at the same time, I'm kind of just like, you know that you aren't strong enough to stay in place. So why, she's so intelligent, why hasn't she come up with this idea? Like, anyway, that to me was kind of just like the stubbornness of Violet, and it's very frustrating and mind-boggling.
I know that there's the criticism of like, wow, they've had dragons for so long and now they're just inventing a saddle. But I think part of it, okay, this is like how I reconcile this disconnect, is dragons are very prideful. They're not gonna like just allow themselves to wear a saddle. And so the author did try to address this by having Taryn say, you are special, like, you are smart, and I'm not gonna let your, like, weak joints or whatever prevent you from fulfilling your potential. And so that's why I'm okay with, like, wearing the saddle.
I also think that the way that it's described is that they almost have not quite a built-in saddle, but there's a spot on their backs that is almost designed for someone to ride them.
It's like saddle-like. Yeah, because it even has a pommel on it. Yeah. I did remember the battle briefings. I really enjoyed the battle briefings, and I wish we got more of it, because that was an engaging way to give more exposition. And that was a bit more of the showing rather than the telling. But we only got, I think, like 2 or 3, really.
Yeah.
The last thing I'll say is I really like the twist of the feather tails, where they are actually the younglings and they haven't developed into, whatever green sword tail or black dagger tail or whatever. And I thought that was a nice touch.
And then there's a little comment right at the very end about Andana.
Oh, yes.
And if you blink, you'll miss it.
Yes. She is now, what would you call it? Yeah, like a full-grown dragon.
Well, I mean...
And she's lost her
She's actually not quite a full-grown dragon.
Not quite full. She's definitely bigger.
It suggests that she's closer to a full. What does it actually say?
And she's lost her time-stopping powers.
Don't panic, everything is fine. And Dana isn't quite the same, but she's her. She's huge now.
All right. Ready to wrap up?
Yes, I am.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening to our rambles and chat about Fourth Wing. If you hated this book, hopefully we gave you some things to think about. If you love this book, well, hopefully you don't hate us. And with that, we shall say goodbye. Until next time. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
I also think that I had a thought and now it's escaped me. So I don't know if I think. What were we talking about? Totalitarian. Oh, I remember.
Put a dent in 'em. Vi stands for violence.